We're going to read Where the Mountain Meets the Moon. We're starting at chapter 12. Remember, the last couple of things that have happened in the story of Minli is that she met the dragon and she found out how the dragon was born, which is that he was part of a painting, right, for the magistrate. And then Ma and Ba are going through on the trail where Minli went, trying to find her, and they have just encountered the man with the goldfish, the same one that Minli found and bought the goldfish from earlier. So this is chapter 12. I'm just going to read. If there's a picture, then I'll show it up and you'll be able to see it. Chapter 12. The goldfish man turned around and smiled questioningly at Ma and Ba, who could do nothing but continue to stare. He was slender and small, which was perhaps why it was easy to mistake his footprints for Minli's. The dragging lines, Ma had thought, were from Minli's walking stick, led to his cart, and the bowls of goldfish caught the sifting beams from the sun, slivering it into flashing sparkles of light. The goldfish man's eyes also flashed as he looked at Ma and Ba and their dust-covered clothes and haggard, tired faces. "Can I help you?" he asked them. "We were looking for our daughter," Ba stammered. "We are from the village of Fruitless Mountain. You sold her a goldfish, and then," Ma sputtered, "and then she ran away to change our fortune." "I see," the goldfish man said. And again he looked at them, at Ma's tight, angry frown and Ba's careworn, worried face. "And you are going after her to stop her?" "Of course," Ba said. "We need to bring her home." "Yes," Ma said. "She is acting crazy. Who knows what could happen to her?" "She could succeed," the goldfish man said steadily. "She could find a way to change her fortune." "She's trying to find Never-Ending Mountain," Ma said. "Ask questions of the old man of the moon. There is no way for her to succeed." "Yes," Ba said. "It's impossible." The goldfish man looked a third time at Ma and Ba, and this time they felt it. Under his gaze, Ma and Ba suddenly felt like freshly peeled oranges, and their words fell away from them. Inexplicably, they felt ashamed. "Let me tell you a story," the goldfish man said. This is the story of the goldfish man. This is what I was talking about. Every time they give you a story, they give you some kind of marking like that. "My grandmother, Lau Lau, was a famous fortune teller. People from faraway villages would line up at our home asking for lucky dates for weddings and predictions for their children. If she was ever wrong, we never heard of it. But a week before my 19th birthday, we heard her moaning in her room. We rushed to her. We found her sitting on the floor with her fortune-telling sticks spread around her. To my surprise, as soon as I entered the room, her piercing eyes fixed upon me. 'You,' she said, 'you will die next week, on your birthday.' It was as if she had exploded a firecracker in the room. My parents and aunts and cousins burst in exclamations and wails. 'It is true! It is true!' my grandmother insisted. 'I have checked and rechecked over and over again, and the sticks always say the same. Next week, on his 19th birthday, he will die. That is his fortune.' I could not believe it. How could this be? But my belief in my grandmother was unshakable. If she said so, it must be true. I stood staring as my family created a storm around me. Finally, I said with mouth as dry as sand, 'Lau Lau, isn't there anything I can do?' 'There's only one thing you can do,' she said, 'but it is doubtful it will work.' 'I'll do it,' I said. 'First,' Lau Lau said, 'we must get a bottle of the finest wine and make a box of sweets.' So Lau Lau went to the rich magistrate of the town and persuaded him to give her a bottle of his best wine. My mother and aunts hurried to the kitchen and prepared cakes, cookies, and sweetmeats with more care than ever before. Before the aromas of the delicacies were captured in our most ornate box, they floated into the air, causing all the neighborhood animals to whine at the door. And then Lau Lau went into her room and began to read her fortune sticks. When she came out, she gave me the box of sweets and bottle of wine and sat me down. 'Listen to me carefully,' she said. 'You must do exactly as I say. Tomorrow morning you must walk north of the village. Do not stop until the moon begins to appear in the sky. When it does, you will see a mountain before you, and at the foot of the mountain you will see an old man reading a book. Open the box of sweets and bottles of wine and set them by him, but do not say a word unless he speaks to you first. This is the only chance we have to change your fortune." So the next morning I followed her instructions, and it was as she'd said. I walked all day, and when the sun finally withdrew from the sky, there was a vast mountain in front of me, whose tip seemed to touch the moon. Sitting cross-legged at the bottom was an old man reading a giant book. The light from the moon seemed to make him glow silver. I opened the box of wine and box of sweets and quietly laid them next to him. Then I sat and waited. The old man didn't notice me and continued to read. My mouth watered as the smell of sweets drifted in the air, but I didn't move. And even though the old man was engrossed in his book, he must have smelled them as well, because without lifting his eyes from the page, he began to eat. It was only when the bottle of wine was empty and he was eating the last cake that the old man lifted his head. He seemed surprised to see a half-eaten cake in his hand. "I've been eating someone's food," he said to himself. He looked up and saw me sitting nearby. "You, boy, was this your food?" "Yes," I said, and I came closer as he beckoned. "Well, what are you doing here?" I told the old man my story while he rubbed his beard. When I finished, he said nothing, but began to turn pages in his book. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, it is true. You are to live only 19 years. And he turned the book toward me in the moonlight. I read my name on the page. Next to my name was the number 19. "Please," I couldn't help asking, "isn't there any way to change it?" "Change it? Change the book of fortune?" "Yes," I nodded. Well, the old man said, stroking his beard, "I am indebted to you for having eaten your food." He took a paintbrush from his robe and studied the page. He said to himself, "Maybe perhaps, yes, this is how it can be done." And with a simple flick from his brush, he changed the 19 to 99. "Good," he said to me. "You now have more years of life. Live them well." Then he closed his book, stood up, and began to walk up the mountain, leaving me staring behind him. I sat there until he disappeared from sight, and then turned around and went home. I want you to think for a minute about some of the clues they gave you. Think about who this man is that was reading this book of fortune and could change what it said. The next week, on my birthday, there was a terrible typhoon. The wind howled as it never had before, and a tree fell right on top of the roof of our house and crashed into my room, narrowly missing me. If it had fallen just a bit more to one side, I would have been easily killed. But as I climbed out of the ruins of my room, I saw my grandmother's eyes staring into mine. Silently, she nodded. She did not need words to tell me what had happened. I knew my fortune had been changed. And that's the end of the story of the goldfish. So now it's back to Ma and Ba and the goldfish man. But for Minli, to try to do that is different, Ba started. She's trying to find Never-Ending Mountain. Ask a question. She's just a small girl. "Perhaps," the goldfish man said. "You need to trust her." "But," Ma said, "but what she wants is impossible." "Impossible?" the goldfish man said. "Don't you see? Even fates written in the book of fortune can be changed. How can anything be impossible?" Ma and Ba could find no words. His eyes and the hundreds of eyes of the goldfish behind him seemed to silently scold them. As they looked at the ground, the goldfish man shifted back his bag and turned towards his cart. "Here, a gift," he said, placing a bowl into Ba's shaking hands. The fish, the pale silver color of the moon, circled in the bowl. "Perhaps, if you cannot trust your daughter, will find Never-Ending Mountain, you should trust that she will return home to you, because that is not impossible. So whether Minli brings it to you or not, I wish you good fortune." And with a bow, the goldfish man walked away. His bowls of goldfish cast pieces of rainbow in the air, making him sparkle in the sun. Ma and Ba stood and watched him until he looked like a twinkling star in the distance. Chapter 13. After cutting the dragon free, Minli's knife was dull and the skin on her fingers and toes was wrinkled from having been in the dragon's lake of tears for so long. She was also very thirsty. The dragon offered to carry her to a freshwater stream. He knew the forest well. "You'll get there much faster," he said. Minli was a little doubtful about riding the dragon. It was one thing to climb on top of him while he was half covered by water, but now on dry land she realized how large he really was. The dragon was long as the street in front of Minli's house. If he stretched himself up on his arms and legs, he was as tall as a bird's nest in a tree, she realized. Even now, bending down for her, he was higher than her house. But he bent his elbow for her like a step, and with 2 hands, she boosted herself up and then climbed onto his back. The round ball on the dragon's head was the size of a small melon, just big enough for her to wrap 2 hands around it, and she clutched it as the dragon began to move. It was faster, but not much. The dragon was nimble, but his large body had to constantly maneuver around trees and rocks, so it was awkward going. The constant jerking made Minley feel like she was riding a huge water buffalo. As the dragon ducked underneath branches and swerved through trees, Minley understood why most dragons flew. "Dragon, how old are you?" "Old? I do not know." "Well," Minley said, "how long have you been in this forest?" The dragon thought hard. "A long time. I remember when a bird flew from the sky and dropped a peach pit onto the ground. I watched that pit grow into a tree, and the peaches fell from the tree, and more trees grew from the pits of those peaches, until it became the grove of peach trees that the monkeys have now taken over." "He is very old," Minley thought to herself, imagining the growth of the trees. Dragon must have been in this forest for 100 years, and she felt a pang of pity as she imagined the dragon alone, unable to fly, endlessly struggling between trees and branches. After picking up her things and drinking at the freshwater stream, Minley climbed back on the dragon's back. She soon fell asleep, her head on the dragon's ball and her hand holding her rice bowl. Noticing she was asleep, the dragon moved slowly and quietly, even when the water from Minley's compass splashed and trickled down his nose. It was only when a loud shrieking filled the forest that Minley woke. It was such a wild and harsh noise that she bolted up, her eyes wide open in fear. "Do not worry," the dragon told her. "It's just the monkeys." And it was the monkeys. Even though the sun was dimming, Minley could see the monkeys clamoring in the trees. Even though Minley could not count that many of them, their screaming made it sound as if there were thousands. "We're getting close to the peach trees," the dragon told Minley, "and they are getting angry." "Stop here," Minley said. She climbed off the dragon's back, and she could still see the monkeys through the leaves and branches, their bared teeth flashing. "Those peach trees are exactly the direction we want to go. We have to get past the monkeys." "I could still force my way through, but the monkeys would attack you," Dragon said. "I'm not sure if we could get you through unharmed. Listen to them." And the monkeys continued to scream. Minley covered her ears with her hands, but she could still hear them. It seemed like they were screeching, "Get away from here! Ours! Ours! All ours!" "You're right," Minley told the dragon. "They are not going to let us through." "But you said that is the way to the Old Man in the Moon," said the dragon, "correct?" Minley nodded. The monkey's shrieks were starting to sound like hysterical laughter, getting louder and louder like a volcano about to erupt. She looked from side to side, but the monkeys seemed to be everywhere. There was no way around them. Then the dragon said, "What are we going to do?" Chapter 14. I want to show you the little picture. It's just the picture with the chapter, but that should give you a clue about whether we're going to still be on Minley and Dragon or go back to Ma and Ba. Because that's what? A monkey with the peaches. So that tells us we're going to read about who? Minley and the dragon. All right, chapter 14. Minley and the dragon had sat in the clearing and made camp for the night. As the sun fell and the moon rose, the dragon showed her how he could make sparks by scratching his claws against a stone, and they built a small campfire. As Minley and the dragon made no moves to go farther into the forest, the monkeys had quieted down, but they still watched. "There are plenty of peaches for all," Dragon said. "Those monkeys do not have to be so greedy." "Really?" Minley said. "Yes," Dragon said. "The monkeys are so foolish. They just want more and more, even when they do not need it. I have seen them refuse to let go of rotten mushrooms and fight over piles of mud." At those words, Minley sat up and her eyes flashed with quick thinking. Piles of mud. Suddenly, Minley remembered the 2 children fighting over their pile of mud as she had left the village. Instead of going inside for dinner, the children had clung to their pretend dishes of dirt. They were so foolish. Could the monkeys be that foolish? They were too selfish for trading or bribes. But maybe they were so greedy they could be foolish enough to be tricked. Maybe if she... "I'm going to make rice," Minley said abruptly. "Oh," the dragon said, "you must be hungry. Too bad we cannot get you some peaches." "It's not for me." Minley smiled mysteriously. "It's for the monkeys." "The monkeys?" Dragon said. "Why? If you mean it as a gift or as a way to bribe them, it will not work. They will take it and eat it, but they will not let you through." "That's what I'm expecting," Minley said as she filled her pot with water and uncooked rice. She was bursting to tell Dragon her idea, but wasn't sure how much the monkeys understood of their words. She looked at him with sparkling eyes, but he only stared back blankly. "You are? I do not understand," said the dragon. "Don't worry," Minley said. "I think I know how we can pass the monkeys." The dragon watched as Minley stirred the big pot of rice. Through the rising steam, he could see the beady eyes of all the monkeys glittering through the branches like hundreds of diamonds as they watched as well. "The monkeys are watching," he whispered to Minley. "Good," she whispered back. "I hope they are." When the rice was done, the pot was overflowing with snowy white rice. It was so heavy that to take it off the fire, to cool, she had to ask the dragon to move it for her. Minley had the dragon place it very close to the trees where the monkeys were watching. Then Minley tied her fishnet over the rice and pot. As Minley and the dragon turned away, they could hear the monkeys chattering. "That fishnet will not stop the monkeys from taking the rice," the dragon said. "It's tightly woven, but their hands will probably fit through." "I know," Minley said as she put out the fire. "Let's pretend that we think the rice is safe and we are letting it cool." Though puzzled, the dragon nodded. They placed themselves a far distance from the rice, yet still within sight, put out the fire, and pretended to go to sleep. But Minley could not help peeking. Though she tried to lie still, she was filled with excitement. Would her plan work? Would the monkeys take the rice? In the bright light of the moon, the monkeys glanced slyly at them and stole over to the rice. The dragon was right. Just as he'd said, the fishnet could not keep the monkeys from the rice. Their slender hands slid through the holes of the fishnet, and each grabbed 2 big fistfuls of rice. But as the monkeys tried to carry the rice away, the net caught them. The holes in the net were not large enough for excuse me. I have to turn the page back. Sorry. The holes in the net were large enough for their empty hands to fit through, but not large enough for their full fist. So they were able to get their hand through, but when they were holding a big pile of rice, they couldn't get back out. They were stuck. The monkeys screamed and pulled, and Minley and the dragon no longer pretended to be asleep. They couldn't help laughing as they watched the monkeys struggling to punch the air and each other with their trapped fists. Minley quickly packed her things, and the monkeys screeched and shrieked as they passed. The heavy pot of rice shook as the monkeys fought violently to get free. But the fishnet was strong and well woven, and since the monkeys were too greedy to let go of the rice, Minley and the dragon entered the peach grove and continued through the forest. That's pretty smart. All right, chapter 15. Ma and Ba sat in front of a small fire that Ba had built. Their disappointment at not having found Minley forced them to admit their exhaustion, and they had slept under the canopy of tree branches during the day, leaving their silver goldfish as guardian. By the time they had awakened, it was late afternoon, but neither of them made any attempt to move. Neither spoke, but they both knew they were unsure whether to go forward or go back. While the sun burst into multicolored flames on the horizon, its last wave goodbye before surrendering to the night, Ma handed Ba a bowl of rice porridge. Neither of them spoke as they ate, both thinking about the goldfish man's words. Should they let Minley try to change their fortune? Should they stop looking and, like the goldfish man said, trust her? Ba sighed. Trying to find Minley is like trying to find the paper of happiness, Ba said to himself. What paper of happiness? A voice said. Ba looked sharply around. Who said that? He looked at Ma, but she continued to stir her porridge, obviously unaware. Ba shook his head. Perhaps his weariness was making him imagine things. Tell the story, old man. She's listening. The voice spoke again. She won't admit it, but she wants to hear it too. Ba looked around again. It seemed like the voice was coming from the goldfish. He looked closely at the bowl. Was it the firelight that made it glow like that? The fish stared back at him calmly, as if waiting. So Ba took a deep breath and began the story. This is the story of the paper of happiness. Once, a long, long time ago, a family grew famous for their happiness. It seemed odd that this would happen, but they were truly an unusual household. Even though aunts and uncles, cousins and grandchildren lived together, there was never a cross word or an unhappy noise. All were polite and thoughtful to each other. Even the chickens did not fight each other for feed. It was said even babies were born smiling. Stories of their happiness spread like seeds in the wind, sprouting and blooming everywhere, until finally even young Magistrate Tiger heard of them. Even though he had just begun his position, this was before his son was born, the bellowing, roaring magistrate was already called Magistrate Tiger. "Impossible," he scoffed. "The stories are exaggerated. No family can be that happy." But even so, he was curious and sent an emissary to the family to observe. The emissary returned awed. "You're magnificent. It is just as the stories say," he said. "I observed the family for a full moon, and not one sad or angry word was even whispered. The adults are loving and faithful, the children are gracious and respectful, and all honor the grandfather with an esteem that rivals the gods. Even the dogs do not bark, but wait patiently to be fed. The family circle is one of complete harmony." "That's impossible," the magistrate said, astonished. But as he thought about it, the more he began to wonder. What was the secret the family had? They must have had some magical charm or hidden knowledge, and this began to irritate him. He began to covet the family's happiness. "I am the magistrate," he thought. "If there is a secret to happiness, I should have it." So he called his emissary to him and presented him with an empty, heavily encrusted chest and a company of soldiers. "Return to the family," Magistrate ordered, "and tell them I want the secret of their happiness put in this box. If they do not do so, have the soldiers destroy their home." The emissary did what he was told. When the troop of soldiers surrounded the house, the family looked fearful. But when the magistrate's demand was announced, the grandfather smiled. "That's easy enough," he said, and he had the trunk brought into the house and returned in moments. "It is done. I've put the secret of our happiness inside the box, and you may take it. We hope it serves our magistrate well." The emissary was slightly surprised at the ease of his task, but could find no objection, so he turned the soldiers and the box around and began to travel back to the palace. The emissary knew the magistrate would be impatient for his return, so the soldiers marched through the night with only the light of the moon to guide them. The treasure box, lying on a platform carried by 4 men, seemed to glow. However, as the ground grew rocky and steep, a sudden wind blew, like the mountain itself was yawning. One of the soldiers stumbled in the rising dust, and the box crashed to the ground. The lid of the box flew off, and like a freed butterfly, a single sheet of paper fluttered out. "Get it!" the emissary shouted to the soldiers. "Don't lose the secret!" But despite his yells, the paper seemed to be able to escape the soldiers' flailing arms. One soldier almost caught it, his very fingertips touching the paper, but another sudden wind burst through the air and stole it away. Silently, the emissary and the soldiers watched the paper lift higher and higher in the night sky until it overlapped the moon and disappeared. The emissary had no choice but to return to the palace with an empty box. As he relayed the story, Magistrate Tiger, not surprisingly, was enraged. "You lost it? It was a paper?" the magistrate roared. "What was on it?" "Your Magnificence," the emissary trembled. "As I felt the secret was for your eyes only, I did not read the paper before it was lost. However, as it was in the air, all could see there was a single line of words on it." "What did the line say?" the magistrate demanded. "I don't know, Magistrate," the emissary said, "but there was one soldier who almost caught it and was closest to it. Perhaps he was able to read the line." So the soldier was called in, and very humbly did he bow. He was little more than a boy, and he had only recently joined the magistrate's army from a small, poor, faraway village. "You," the magistrate said, "you were the only soldier close enough to the paper to read the line. What did it say?" The boy flushed, and his head touched the floor as he bowed again. "Great Magistrate, I am your poor servant," he said. "I was close enough to see the line on the page. However, I cannot read. I do not know what the line said." Magistrate Tiger scowled with irritation, and the emissary and the soldier shivered. I did notice something," the soldier said. "What?" the magistrate demanded. There was only one character on the page, the soldier said. The line was one word written over and over again many times. One word? The magistrate snarled, and his anger seemed to burn deep in his eyes. One word is the secret to happiness? It was a trick. The family must have thought they could deceive me. Emissary, gather all my troops. I personally will get the secret of happiness and punish that family of lowly dogs. So the next day, with Magistrate Tiger and his entire army prepared for destruction, the emissary led the way to the home of the happy family. But when they arrived, nothing was there. No house, no chickens or sheep, no family. Instead, there was only a flat plain, as if the whole home had been scooped up from the earth. Magistrate Tiger scowled at the blank ground with rage and vowed to punish the family for their disrespect. But while he glared, the wind blew and covered him with a grayish-green dust. As he stood like a green-powdered statue, he felt as if the sky were laughing at him. Okay, that's the end of that story. So I think, Minley, like the secret word and the paper of happiness, Ba said, is not meant to be found. He glanced at Ma, and while she did not meet his gaze, she made no objections either. And tomorrow, Ba continued gently, we should return and wait for her to come home. Again, Ma said nothing, but barely, perhaps only because he was looking for it. She nodded. Ba nodded back at her and quietly took some rice and dropped it into the fishbowl. I want you to think about that very last part real quick, him dropping the rice into the fishbowl. We've seen that before, that he fed the fish, and you know that they don't have very much. So that the author is showing you how kind of a heart Ba has, how kind he is. All right, so we'll stop there, and then tomorrow we'll pick back up in chapter 16.